At Christmas dinner, my parents disowned me. So I disown them back. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lacey. I'm 27, and for as long as I can remember, I've bent over backwards trying to make my parents proud. I thought Christmas was supposed to be a time for family, for love, for forgiveness. Instead, it became the night my whole world split in half. The table was set beautifully that evening. Candles glowed against silver dishes. The smell of roasted ham and cinnamon pies filled the room, and soft music played in the background. Everyone laughed, clinked glasses, and traded little jokes as if we were in some holiday movie. For a moment, I let myself believe I was part of that warmth. I sat across from my younger brother, Rhett, who was already smirking at me in that way he always did, like he knew something I didn't. My mom, Marjorie, kept refilling his glass with wine, even though he hadn't finished the first one. My dad, Grant, carved the ham like he was the king of the evening. I tried to join in, smiling, asking about people's jobs, their kids, their holiday plans. But every time I spoke, I felt eyes cut toward me, then away, like I had walked mud into the room. Halfway through dinner, when plates were piled with food and conversation was loud, my mother put down her fork. She looked at me across the table, her lips tight, her eyes cold. "Lacey," she said, and the room went quiet. "Your father and I need to say something." My chest tightened. The way she said it made me want to sink into the chair. My dad cleared his throat. "We've decided it's time we stop pretending. You are no longer part of this family." At first, I thought I misheard him. The room spun. A piece of ham slipped off my fork and hit the plate. My mom leaned in, her voice sharper. "We're done with your choices, your life, all of it. You embarrassed this family enough. Tonight, it ends." No one spoke. No one defended me. My cousins stared at their plates. My aunt shifted uncomfortably. Rhett smirked even wider, like he had been waiting for this moment. The sting in my chest spread like fire. All those years of trying to earn their love, gone in a sentence. I wanted to scream, to ask how could you do this to your own daughter? But my throat locked up. Instead, I pushed back my chair. The scrape of wood against the floor was louder than anything else in the room. I stood, holding myself together by a thread. My hands trembled, but I wouldn't let them see me cry. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the house. Behind me, the laughter and music faded. Ahead of me, the cold night air cut my face. That was the moment I knew I would never beg for their love again. The silence around the table felt heavy, like the air itself had turned against me. My father's voice cut through it again, steady and cruel. "You're not really our daughter anymore," he said. "Not after the way you've chosen to live." My stomach twisted. The words landed harder than any slap could. I glanced around, desperate for someone to speak up. Plates were filled, glasses still half full, yet every face avoided mine. Forks rested on napkins. Eyes dropped toward food, like staring at stuffing or turkey was easier than looking at me. My mother's tone was sharp. "We raised you better, Lacey. But you've thrown it all away. You don't belong to this family anymore." I tried to open my mouth, but nothing came out. My throat felt dry, raw, like I had swallowed glass. Across from me, Rhett leaned back in his chair. His smirk was slow, deliberate, like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. He didn't have to say a word. The curl of his lips told me he had known what was coming all along. Maybe he even helped plan it. The chatter of the room had died completely, but the sounds that remained cut like knives. The scrape of utensils, the sharp clink of crystal glasses, the faint chewing from someone too nervous to stop eating. Each small sound stabbed at me, louder than they should have been. Every bite of turkey chewed by someone else felt like it echoed, like daggers slicing into me. I forced myself to look at my parents again, hoping maybe there was hesitation, some sign of doubt. But my father sat tall, chest puffed, as if announcing my exile was some grand act of strength. My mother crossed her arms, her eyes as cold as the snow outside. Heat rose in my face, my hands trembling under the tablecloth. I wanted to demand an explanation, to scream at them for humiliating me in front of everyone. But the room pressed down on me, suffocating, and my voice stayed trapped inside. Rhett leaned forward, finally speaking. His words dripped with mockery. "Guess it's just me now, huh? The one kid who didn't ruin everything." A few chuckles slipped from cousins at the far end, nervous, uncomfortable. It was the kind of laughter people use when they're afraid to pick a side. None of them looked at me. I felt my heart pounding so hard I thought the whole table could hear it. My parents had taken years of quiet judgment and turned it into a public execution. No one came to my defense. Not an aunt, not an uncle, not even the grandmother I once cared for through long nights of illness. The people I had thought of as family sat frozen, choosing silence over me. I sat there, cold inside, realizing the truth. I wasn't losing my parents that night. They had already been gone. My mother's voice came next, colder than ice. Her words were clear, sharp, and final. "We're done with you, Lacey. You embarrassed this family for the last time." The sound of her sentence rang in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop echoing. My chest tightened as if all the air had been pulled from the room. I turned my eyes toward the people who shared my blood, hoping for the smallest flicker of support. My brother kept his gaze steady on the table, his jaw tight, unmoved. My sister adjusted her napkin, refusing to meet my stare. Even the youngest cousins sat stiff, too afraid to speak, too afraid to be seen siding with me. Every single one of them chose silence, and that silence felt louder than any accusation. A deep ache spread through my stomach, but I didn't let a sound escape. I could feel my nails digging into the fabric of my dress under the table, the sting in my palms grounding me. They had stripped me down in front of everyone, and still, I would not hand them the satisfaction of tears or pleas. I forced myself to rise slowly. The chair legs scraped across the floor, cutting through the quiet. My hands shook, but I pressed them flat against the wood to steady myself. My eyes stayed forward. I wouldn't give them the chance to see me crumble. Not a word left my mouth. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. What was the point? Their judgment was already carved in stone. Begging would only make me smaller in their eyes, and I refused to leave that way. Step by step, I moved past the dishes and candles, past the glittering decorations meant to celebrate togetherness. The scent of spiced pie and roasted meat followed me, but it no longer felt comforting. It clung like smoke in my throat. My heart pounded as I crossed the doorway. The murmur of voices behind me swelled again, but none were calling after me. No hand reached to stop me. No one said my name. I opened the front door, the chill from outside rushing against my skin. The night was dark, the snow untouched across the yard, and the wind cut through the thin fabric of my sleeves. I didn't care. The door clicked shut behind me, and in that sound was the truth. There was no going back. Their silence, their rejection, their final words. It had burned away whatever fragile ties were left. I walked down the steps, my boots crunching against the ice. With every step, shame and fury mixed together until they felt the same. My body shook, not just from the cold, but from the storm twisting inside me. That walk across the frozen ground wasn't just leaving their house. It was leaving behind years of trying to earn love that was never real. And with every step farther away, something inside me began to change. The night felt endless after I left that house. I sat alone in my apartment, lights dim, the faint hum of the heater filling the silence. My coat was still on, but I couldn't move. My mind kept circling back through years I had tried so hard to forget. Every memory stacked itself like proof in a trial. I thought of the long evenings I spent scrubbing floors and folding laundry when I was barely old enough to hold a broom. I remembered handing over paychecks from my first job at the grocery store so my parents could cover bills, while Rhett wasted his allowance on sneakers and parties. I thought of my grandmother, the one person who had ever shown me real tenderness. The nights I sat at her bedside, spoon-feeding her soup when she was too weak to lift her hand, are still burned into me. I stayed up for days at a time, holding her hand, listening to her stories. When she passed, I didn't see my brother shed a single tear, but he still inherited her jewelry without question. The favoritism was always there, painted in every corner of my childhood. Rhett with new bikes, new clothes, new freedoms. Me with rules, chores, and endless lectures about responsibility. I convinced myself if I worked harder, if I proved myself, eventually they would see me, choose me, love me. But tonight showed the truth. They never planned to. The grief sat heavy in my chest, pressing against my ribs, but anger sparked hot beneath it. How many years had I wasted trying to earn scraps of affection? How many times had I swallowed their insults, telling myself family was forever? Family doesn't throw you out in front of a room full of people. Family doesn't strip you of your place like it's nothing. I stood up finally, pacing the small space of my living room. My reflection in the darkened window stared back at me, eyes red, face tight. I almost didn't recognize her. The words slipped out before I even realized I was speaking. If they disown me, I'll show them what it means to be truly disowned. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a plea. It was a promise. I could feel the decision take root, strong and steady. No more chasing their approval. No more waiting for apologies that would never come. If they wanted me gone, then I would erase them from my life completely, piece by piece. I pulled off my coat, set it over the chair, and sat back down with a pen in hand. My notebook lay open in front of me. Page 1 was blank, waiting. My breathing slowed as I began writing names, debts, obligations, every thread that tied me to them. That night marked the beginning of something new. Grief sat beside me, but rage lit the path forward. They thought they had cut me off. They had no idea what I was about to do. The morning after, I woke up with a weight pressing down on me, but it wasn't despair anymore. It was purpose. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee untouched, pen in hand, and started untangling myself from them piece by piece. First came the paperwork. I pulled out my will, a document I had carefully drafted years ago. Their names were there, my parents listed as beneficiaries, read as a backup. My pen carved through those lines with finality. By the time I finished, every trace of them was gone from the page. If anything happened to me, not a cent, not a single belonging, would ever find its way into their hands. Next, I moved through every account I had: banking, savings, even my health records. Emergency contacts? Their numbers vanished, replaced with the names of colleagues and friends who had shown me more care in a month than my family had in decades. It felt like surgery, cutting out rot to save what was still alive. The phone book by my side grew lighter as I flipped and crossed out entries. No more automatic calls to Marjorie if I ended up in a hospital. No more links tying me to Grant when the bank needed a secondary name. My life was no longer theirs to claim. But it didn't stop with clean cuts. As I erased them, I couldn't ignore the arsenal I carried in my head. Secrets I had stored quietly for years, thinking I would never use them. Now they glowed like matches in the dark. I remembered the folder I had once stumbled across in my father's desk, numbers that didn't add up, receipts tucked away, money shuffled where it shouldn't be. His taxes weren't clean, and I knew it. I thought of my mother's late-night phone calls, the hushed tones, the perfume lingering on her coat when she swore she was just at the grocery store. I had seen the way she leaned too close to a man who wasn't my father in the church parking lot. And Rhett, reckless, spoiled Rhett. I had covered for him once, paid off a chunk of debt to stop collectors from calling the house. His gambling wasn't a secret, not to me. It was a fire he kept feeding, one I could expose in an instant. Each secret was a weapon, and I laid them out in my mind like tools on a workbench. This wasn't about wild revenge or some dramatic showdown. It was about precision. If they thought I was weak enough to accept being thrown out, they would soon learn how wrong they were. I closed the notebook that now held their erased names and my sharpened plans. My hand was steady, my heart strangely calm. I wasn't running from them anymore. I was building a life where their power no longer touched me, and where the truth I carried could strike when I chose. The plan had begun. I began my actions with quiet, careful steps. I didn't shout or threaten. I moved through official channels, following rules and filling forms. A trained investigator called me after I sent in the documents. Photocopies of ledgers, odd transfers, invoices with names crossed out. I answered questions calmly, handed over the records I had kept for years, and watched as the investigator's tone shifted from polite to alert. Within weeks, auditors showed up where my father managed his accounts. Men with badges and folders asked him to stand aside while they reviewed files. He looked stunned, then furious, then small. Next, I targeted the fragile image my brother had built. I sent a packet to his workplace. Copies of statements that mapped his late-night bets, screenshots of messages where he begged for credit, and notes from collectors who had tried and failed to reach him. I didn't call anyone and I didn't gloat. HR did their job. They called him into a meeting and talked about conflicts of interest and trust. The promotion he'd been promised evaporated. Colleagues who once smiled when he walked by now avoided eye contact. He wandered home that night like someone who had lost a map. The last blow was softer but more devastating for them socially. I let it happen the way rumors often do, small, believable, whispered. At a holiday gathering for the congregation, an old friend of my mother's mentioned something in passing, a name, a place, a late-night car. That seed spread to other ears and then to the right ones. Women who kept their eyes open at church lunches, men who noted patterns. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation on the front steps. It was a slow unraveling of trust. People who had once invited my mother to bake sales and committee meetings stopped including her. Invitations stopped coming. I watched as each of them felt the ground shift under their feet. My father's business faced fines and audits that drained accounts and prestige. He paced through rooms like someone trying to remember a speech he no longer believed in. My brother's confidence cracked in small ways: missed calls, awkward silences, the casual cruelty of coworkers who suddenly knew too much. My mother's circle tightened into a narrow ring of defenders who whispered defenses that no longer sounded convincing. It was not victory as I'd imagined when I planned everything in my notebook. There was no triumphant shout, no applause. Instead, I felt a slow settling, relief edged with a hollow I had not expected. Their fall did not replace the years I had spent trying to belong. It did not mend the nights I had spent awake worrying over their tempers or their favors. But it changed the ledger. It shifted power. People began to ask questions at family dinners that used to be routine. Who paid for what? Who covered which bills? Where did the money go? The answers no longer suited them. Reputation, once solid as stone in our town, proved porous. The world that had turned its head when my parents spoke started to look back. I kept my distance the whole time. I watched from separate rooms, from a life I had begun rebuilding. When the dust settled, they still had each other, tight and ashamed. I kept my hands clean of vengeance's messy theatrics and let consequences do the work. The result was ruin of a kind that reached beyond gossip. Tangible losses, broken trust, small humiliations that stacked until they could not stand. Months passed before the summons came. A message slipped through mutual relatives, then another through an old neighbor. Finally, my father called directly, his voice tight, clipped, carrying more anger than invitation. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet. We chose a neutral space, a plain diner off the highway, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that burned on the tongue. They were already there when I arrived, sitting stiffly side by side. My father's face was flushed, his jaw grinding. My mother's lips were pressed thin, her nails tapping against the table as if she could drill through it. The moment I slid into the booth, the storm broke. "What did you do?" my father demanded, voice low but sharp. "The audits, the fines, don't pretend you don't know." "You cost me my reputation," my mother hissed, eyes darting around the room to make sure no one overheard. "You spread lies. You've dragged us through the mud." Their fury filled the booth, a heat pressing in from both sides. I stirred the cup of coffee the waitress had set down, watching the cream swirl into dark circles. My silence made them angrier. My father leaned forward, veins standing out in his neck. "You betrayed your own family." I set the spoon down gently, the metal clicking against porcelain. Then I lifted my eyes, steady, calm. "You disowned me first. I just returned the favor." The words hung between us, simple and unshaken. My mother's hand froze mid-tap. My father's mouth opened, then shut. For the first time, they had no script, no lecture to throw back at me. They had expected pleading, maybe apologies, maybe excuses. Instead, I gave them nothing but composure. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let anger spill. My power sat in the stillness of my tone, in the fact that I no longer needed their approval or their forgiveness. Their accusations rolled toward me like waves, but I stayed dry, untouched on the shore. They tried again, listing everything they'd lost, demanding explanations, insisting I had turned on them without cause. I let their words run out, let them trip over their own outrage. Every sentence only confirmed what I already knew. They had never seen me as part of them, only as something to control. When the tirade slowed, I stood. My chair slid back with a soft scrape, nothing dramatic. I left money on the table for my coffee. My parents sat frozen, their anger curdled into something closer to disbelief. "I'm not coming back," I said simply. "This meeting doesn't change that." And then I walked out of the diner, steady steps carrying me into the cool night air. Behind me, they remained in that booth, left with their rage and their ruin. I didn't need to look back. My calm had already closed the door on them. Rhett was the first to fold. The day his position disappeared, he carried his boxes back to the house he had once bragged about outgrowing. Neighbors watched from porches as he dragged his things up the familiar driveway. The swagger that had carried him for years was gone. In its place was a slouch, a shadow of entitlement stripped bare. His return wasn't triumphant but desperate, and everyone saw it. Inside that same house, my father was drowning under paperwork he couldn't control. Letters stamped with government seals piled high, demanding answers he couldn't give. Investigators combed through his records, asking questions that cut too close. The man who had once barked orders across the dinner table now spent long nights at his desk, glasses low on his nose, hands shaking as he scribbled figures that never balanced. His voice lost its authority, replaced with mutters and sighs. My mother fared no better. The circles she once ruled turned inward, whispers chasing her wherever she went. At church gatherings, people smiled politely but moved aside. Chairs shifted to leave a gap she couldn't ignore. Friends she had counted on to uphold her image avoided her calls. The affair she thought was hidden had become public currency, traded between gossiping mouths until her name was said with pity rather than admiration. Her polished presence cracked each time she stepped outside, the mask harder to hold in place. The household, once polished and proud, now carried an air of decay. Curtains stayed drawn, cars rarely left the driveway, and conversations inside the walls grew short and bitter. The unity they had once pretended to display was fractured, splintered into blame and resentment. Rhett sulked in his childhood room. My father snapped at anyone within reach, and my mother drifted between them, brittle and silent. The community noticed. People who used to envy them now spoke of decline. Their name, once attached to influence, became shorthand for downfall. They weren't ruined in a single strike, but unraveled thread by thread, until the picture they had spent decades painting collapsed into scraps. And through it all, they knew where the unraveling had started. Their eyes told the story, though they never dared to say my name aloud. Each loss, each humiliation, tied back to the night they had cast me out. They had pulled the first cord, believing I would vanish quietly. Instead, I had pulled back harder. Their empire had been built on silence and fear. Now silence haunted them, and fear lingered in every corner of their lives. The proud family portrait they once presented to the world was broken, and no amount of repair could hide the cracks. They sat in their house together, bound not by love or loyalty but by ruin. And the worst part for them, the part they couldn't escape, was knowing exactly who had set it all in motion. I started over quietly, without ceremony. My phone list was smaller now, but the names left carried weight. People who called to check in without expecting anything back. People who showed up with casseroles when I was sick, or invited me to game nights just to laugh. They weren't bound to me by blood, but by choice, and that made the ties stronger. I let my apartment reflect this new life. The walls held art from local markets instead of family portraits that once stared down on me with judgment. A second-hand table replaced the old dining set, and it became a place where conversations stretched late into the night, filled with stories, jokes, and comfort. For the first time, I chose what stayed in my space, and every piece brought peace instead of pressure. Holidays used to feel like obligations, scripted events with unspoken rules. Now they belonged to me. I tried new recipes, burning a few before I got them right. I set out mismatched plates and laughed when the candles dripped unevenly. My new circle gathered around with open arms, clinking glasses in toasts that carried no hidden barbs. When December returned, I felt a knot in my chest at first. The memory of that last Christmas was sharp, but I didn't let it claim me. I strung lights across my balcony, baked cookies that filled the rooms with sugar and spice, and sent handwritten invitations to the people who mattered. That night, my living room glowed with warmth that had nothing to do with bloodlines. A coworker brought her famous chili. My neighbor arrived with a guitar and strummed old songs between courses. A couple I had befriended over the summer pulled their chairs close, sharing stories about road trips gone wrong. Laughter echoed against the walls, easy and genuine. I sat at the head of my small table, looking at faces lit by soft light. No one here measured me against impossible standards. No one here held grudges or waited for me to stumble. Every smile was real, every word spoken free of cruelty. As we passed dishes around, I realized I wasn't filling a hole anymore. I was building something new. The ache of rejection hadn't disappeared, but it no longer ruled me. I had chosen my family, piece by piece, and it was stronger than the one that had cast me out. When the clock struck midnight, I raised my glass. To all of you, I said, voice steady, thank you for being here. I gestured to the table, the laughter, the food. This is what home feels like. Glasses clinked, cheers rose, and for the first time in years, I felt a holiday pass without a shadow hanging over it. The warmth I had searched for my whole life wasn't missing anymore. I had found it, built it, and finally lived inside it. Snow was falling when the letter arrived. The handwriting was familiar, sharp strokes pressed deep into the paper, as if force could make the words more convincing. They wanted to meet, one last chance, they wrote, to mend what had been broken. For days, I left the envelope on the counter, unread except for that first line. When I finally opened it fully, the words spilled with desperation. Apologies without ownership, pleas wrapped in blame, promises I no longer believed. I didn't respond. Silence was my answer. But they weren't finished. A week before Christmas, they appeared outside my building. I saw them through the window, my father pacing, my mother clutching her coat tighter around her shoulders. For a long moment, I stayed still, hidden behind the curtain. Then I stepped outside. The wind bit against my skin, but I stood steady. My father began first, his voice shaky beneath its usual command. "We've lost enough, Lacey. It's time to let this go. Come home." My mother's eyes glistened, though whether from cold or regret, I couldn't tell. "We made mistakes. Families do. But we can fix this, please." Their words rolled over me without weight. They weren't offering love. They were asking for escape from the ruin they had built. I let the silence stretch until they shifted uncomfortably. Finally, I spoke, my tone even cold enough to match the night. "I don't disown people halfway. You're gone from my life. For good." My father's mouth opened, but no sound came. My mother's face crumpled, yet she said nothing. I turned before they could find more words, walking back inside, the door closing firmly behind me. That evening, I set the table in my apartment. Friends filled the room with laughter, coats draped over chairs, glasses waiting to be filled. The smell of roasted chicken and spiced cider drifted through the space, and music played softly from a speaker tucked on the counter. The glow was warm, alive, nothing like the heavy silence I had grown up in. When everyone gathered, I lifted my glass. "To freedom," I said clear and strong. "To the family we choose." Voices rose around me, glasses touched, and the room erupted with joy. The sound wrapped around me, bright and genuine. I looked at the faces surrounding me, the ones who had chosen to stand beside me without condition. In that moment, I felt the circle close. They had cast me out first, believing it would leave me powerless. Instead, I had cut them away completely, leaving no space for return. The toast lingered in the air, golden in its finality. I raised my glass higher, smiling, not out of triumph, but release. They had disowned me, but I had disowned them back harder. And this time, it was forever. Do you think I made the right choice by cutting them off forever, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments. I'd love your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories.